Well, hello friends. Today is the wrap up video really, or the wrap up day of the first part of my new path flower bed. So recently, if you didn't see the first video, there was a first video where I show the new path that I just put in or had put in at my house and all the new perennials I want to put along the bed. The whole point of this flower bed is really to be somewhat maintenance free in the long run. Obviously, when plants are first planted, no matter if they're drought tolerant or not, they are going to need to be watered extensively, especially through a hot and dry summer that it looks like we're going to have. But once these plants are established, many of them are going to be tolerant to the drier conditions. They're going to take care of themselves, and they're all perennials that will die back to the ground and just compost back into the ground really easily every spring. And that to me is low maintenance. As we look along this flower bed, you're going to see all the plants I previously planted. But if you remember, I had just one variety of plant that was not in yet, and it is in finally. So I have been setting it around in the areas, and we're gonna talk about mulching today too. Now I already had to go ahead and mulch. I was gonna wait and try to mulch it all at once, but to keep these watered during this time has been such a struggle, and once I put mulch on, it made such a difference. We're gonna talk about why. But today, what I have now to plant are these beautiful, and I really do, I love calamint. Calamint is a nepeta, so similar to catmint, but calamint has, to me, actually a better smell, but also just a beautiful white flower that attracts pollinators profusely. They are just buzzing around this plant in the spring. I don't know why they have purple flowers on here too. They're not purple. They're just a white flower, and they're absolutely gorgeous. One of my favorite plants. Mott rose white is one of the kinds, and this white cloud is another one. I just really love this, and I love it mixed with all these other perennials that I'm doing. Now, the one thing you're gonna notice is I tried not to mulch where I'm planting these, just so I don't have to displace soil into the mulch. But all along here, and if you notice I still have one flag, I didn't go over this last time. This flag is showing me where I have my LP tank, which is the gas for my house. It runs right here, and I do want to know that even though it is deeper than these plants were planted, when the path was installed, I made sure to have it marked. But I just wanted to have for myself while I was working out here a reference of where that line was. So that's why I've kept that flag there. But other than that, we are good to go on everything. And I'm really excited to finally kind of just get this completed. One thing I do want to make sure I mention and go over is, if you remember last video, and if you don't, I'll make sure now to say it, I amended this bed. So this was soil that had always just been grass or sod. It had never been planted with anything growing. So what I did was I first went through and I added lots of compost, just good organic compost, and that can be homemade compost. I didn't have any ready, so I used a really good bagged product from Espoma. And then I also added some plant tone, which is just a good fertilizer to give it a jump start. I wanted to add something to the soil. So I added those two items into this bed, tilled them in, and then went ahead and started planting all of these perennials. So there's already a good base in the soil, and that's why now I feel comfortable just finishing up and planting the last few perennials, which is really, it's always kind of a, this is gonna sound hilarious, but I feel like it's always a bittersweet thing when I've been thinking of a bed for so long, and this has been years in the making, that I've been thinking of this path because it's really the beginning to a bigger idea. And this first section now that's done, it's kind of like, oh my, I've been planning on it, thinking about it, looking forward to it, and now it's like, oh, I'm almost done with this first section. So it kind of feels like this weird culmination of excitement, but also like, oh, I can't believe I already did it. So now it will just be maintaining it, which we'll go over also after I get everything planted. So this bed is really against a large wall of arborvitae. They're Niagara arborvitae, which is the green backdrop for this bed, but it gets full sun. So all these perennials are doing full sun and really get the brunt of the sun in the middle of the day, a lot of heat in the summer. We can also have harsh winters. Snow could be sitting on top of them. And all of these perennials are going to do really well with that once they're established. So already what I've done is planted all the first ones in groupings of 3 or 5. And that's just because those odd numbers are usually more appealing to the eye. Just like in home design, odd numbers feel better. So I have mostly groupings of 5, a few groupings of 3 to break it up. And what they will eventually do in time, and my overall hope for this, is that they will really become masses and clumps of a perennial. Instead of seeing all these individual clumps, in this case, this is the Goldstrom rudbeckia, eventually I just want a big sea and a little wave here of that yellow flower. Same with the caradonna, the salvia right here. Eventually I want it to all be growing in together and become a beautiful pattern of just purple all throughout this small spot and then going on down the line. So while they all look like perfect clumps and individual plants right now, in a few years, even already next year, I think you're going to be surprised how much they grow. I want these to start growing into each other, naturalizing into their area, and starting to form beautiful individual small masses of blooms. I'm digging my last hole for this clump of 5. And this is a really good time too to talk about knowing the perennials and the plants you're choosing. So a lot of times on plants, we really don't research them, we don't look into them, and then we'll get home and we'll plant them, and we'll end up realizing in years in the future that they get really bigger than we thought, or they take over more than we thought, and we maybe get mad at the plant and want to pull it out. The thing is, different plants have different habits, and knowing those habits are really important before you just choose plants. In the case of this nepeta, this calamint, once you really research it, you're going to find out that while this is a beautiful plant, it gives sizing on here. Like as an example, this says 12 to 15 inches wide, 18 inches tall. That's true. But as they get established, they will start spreading and can take over much bigger area than that. They can sometimes self-seed, they can start new plants. And in this case, I'm using that to my advantage. I want this whole area of perennials to fill in, to naturalize, to really start growing into each other, just to become this wave of various perennials in color. But sometimes you don't want that. So you need to make sure you start researching and knowing what you're planting. So instead of in the future getting mad and wanting to rip everything out, which I've been there in the past, you need to know how to adapt and work with the things that you're going to be planting and know what they're going to do in the future. Because while they look perfect and small as individual plants now, they will change in the future. So what I'm doing is putting, of course, a nice handful of biotone into each hole as I plant them. It's just a great starter fertilizer. It's organic, and the thing is, it just helps give them a really good jump start, I think. It helps the roots get going, and that to me is the important part. So I'm starting to do that to each hole of this first grouping of 5. And what's nice here is I already did the big work along this whole bed. And this is where the fun part happens is, this is the last few fill-in plants. So it's really simple just to pop all of them in a few holes and just enjoy the process. But remember, you have to plan this out. So a lot of questions are always going to be, when should we plant? Spring, summer, fall, what's the best? And you hear various things. While spring and fall definitely have pros and cons. In the spring, usually you have more rain, cooler temperatures, less stress on the plant. Hopefully they have some easy rainwater to water them before going into a dry summer. In the fall, you have the pros of cooler weather, maybe more rain, but also getting acclimated before winter and then being ready to go the next year. Personally, I plant spring, summer, and fall. I do it when I can find the plants and when it works for me. What you have to know is your future schedule. Are you gonna be home to water things? Because even if you plant it in the spring, you're gonna have to water it throughout the summer. It's a new plant for at least that full year, if not 2 years. Perennials usually are fairly well acclimated in the first year. Trees and shrubs, for the next 2 to 3 years, sometimes you have to water them if you're having extra dry times. But the thing is, if you plan ahead and you know who can water for you, planting at any of those times is gonna work for you. You just have to know that in the middle of summer, things could be more stressed. You're gonna need to watch them better, watch them on hot days, watch when they dry out. But really, I don't think there's a best time because you never know what the future in that year is gonna hold. So you just have to know that you're gonna have to watch it, care for it, and water it. So now that I have that first grouping planted, I'm going to go ahead and plant the next 3 groupings, and then we can talk about watering and mulch, which that's the part where they grow, and that's the part where it really, I think, is exciting to watch. So it's a really fun part. Now that I have everything planted, the really important thing is water. Now, sometimes I will water a plant directly in the hole before I put the soil back around it. That's when I'm super dry, and while we are going into a dry period, the ground still has a decent amount of moisture, and these plants were going in well watered. It's really important to make sure any plant that you're gonna plant is well watered to begin with. It receives water better that way. And so if you put a dry plant into the soil, it's really hard to maintain its watering. So I'm gonna start just by taking my water wand. I like to have a water wand with a breaker at the end. it works on my seedlings in the garden, it works on things like this. Now, I do not have a water system. I go around and hand water. I will every so often set up sprinklers, things like that. But right now I am doing it this way. I have different reasons why. Drip lines don't always work the best for me. I have some in a few spots, but my well water that I use outside is very iron rich, and it has little pieces of iron in it that can really clog items up. So I don't use that a lot. I usually just end up hand watering. But like I said, once these are established within a year or a little bit more, I'm gonna be able to not water them. They're gonna really take care of themselves even in drier periods. So before I had mulch on any of this bed, I was having to water it every day, and a couple times I was having to water it more like morning and evening because everything was drying out so quickly. That's why mulch is so important. But what I'm doing is just going through, and you're gonna notice I'm watering directly at each plant. The thing to remember whenever you plant a new plant, it only has its root ball. Those roots are not gonna be branching out into the native soil for a while, so it's gonna take them a while to really start getting water on their own. And it's for that reason that it's really important just to water them directly on their root ball, saturate that root ball, which for these small 1 gallon size perennials doesn't take too much, and then let them go for a while. You don't need to overwater them once they're retaining that moisture. So I'll go around and water each one really well, and we're just gonna go ahead and mulch it. When it comes to mulch, there's multiple types and varieties of mulch. I prefer usually using a hardwood mulch, all natural, untreated, no coloring added. Now, that doesn't mean that works for everyone. Some people have termite issues and need to watch for that. To me, really the best mulch to use would just be a nice leaf mulch. The problem is it's not always readily available. I don't have enough leaves produced here to really make my own leaf mulch to be able to use in all these areas. I do compost my leaves, but not enough to just mulch them and then use them. So if you can find a leaf mulch, that's great. Rock is never my preferred way to mulch, especially in a perennial bed like this. I want these to naturalize and move. Rock mulch, or just rocks, does not allow them to move easily within the bed. It really inhibits that actually. And also I feel rock can sometimes get too hot. It can trap in too much moisture or things like that. Also, the important thing is to note, you don't need to over mulch. A 2 to 3 inch layer at most is enough. Don't just pile on mulch every year either. That's a really bad thing. So what we're gonna start by doing is just doing some hardwood mulch. I buy mine in bulk, so I have a massive pile of it, and then I put it on the back of my gator so I can just get it easily and put it where I want it. So what I have here is all of my mulch, and you can see for me, it's just a hardwood mulch. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone's gonna be able to find it. You know, cedar I have used in the past, cypress, I have found there are certain things that to me don't benefit the best with those. I just use all natural mulch, and I want it to slowly decompose. That is the point of mulch. I want this to not only suppress weeds, retain moisture, but also decompose back into the soil. So I just grabbed scoopfuls of this, and by hand we'll be putting it now around all those plants we just planted. So I'm bringing in my scoop of mulch, and obviously it's a little bit more tedious just because I'm going around the plants. But the reason we wait is because if you mulched it first and then dug the holes, it would displace so much soil into the mulch, which would cause more of those weed seeds to be in the mulch. So once I put it around, just by hand, I'm lightly putting it in front of them and all around them. And the difference you're gonna get from this mulch, retaining the moisture, it is amazing, and it's so well worth it. And just that 2 to 3 inch layer will do that. It's also going to suppress weed seeds. Whenever you leave soil barren and just open, instantly you're gonna have weeds, especially on freshly tilled soil. Because when you till soil, you bring up thousands of weed seeds to the light, to the air, to the moisture, which is what causes them to grow. That's why you never wanna leave soil barren, because it will just bring on the weeds. So what I'm gonna do is just start putting this mulch all around now, this final batch of plants, which is kind of nice to be at this point where I'm finishing up. And I do try to shake it off if I get it on top of the plants I just planted. Nothing too aggressive, but just make sure they're not being inhibited or feeling like they're tight. But what the mulch like this will do, it's gonna allow these to get bigger and grow through the mulch, and that's what you want. You don't want the mulch so thick that it inhibits the plants from naturalizing and growing as they want to. So I have a few more spots to do, then it will be done. I have all the mulching done, and one, yes, this obviously cleans it up. It makes it look nicer, and I think that's why we're always tempted to add mulch on every year, because it looks fresh and new. You can see I watered all my plants now. But don't be tempted to do that. Instead, every year what I will do is rake this with a hard landscape rake, break it up into more of a fresh look, but make sure it's not clumping together. You don't want the actual mulch to clump together. Sometimes it can cause mildew when it's too much and too thick and starts becoming cakey layers, and you don't want that. So instead, I will rake this once a year, and then when it gets below that 2-inch layer on top, I will then possibly add more mulch. But honestly, I want to get to the point where these perennials need no mulch because they are taking over and becoming self-sufficient. Every year their foliage will die back to the ground. That can be mulched back into the ground and become really a layer of suppressing weeds, retaining that moisture on its own. So that's the whole self-sufficient nature of a lot of these perennials. So I hope you enjoyed seeing my thought process and the way I was putting this new flower bed together. It's a little bit different than how I've thought in the past. In the past, I have some very formal areas with lots of boxwood hedges. I have some very kind of more finicky areas, and while I love those, I find that they take more work. So the more beds I put in, I want them to be more self-sustaining. I want them to attract pollinators, really help the surroundings and take care of themselves. And that's what this bed is hopefully all gonna do. So of course I will show you not only more this year as I'm showing the progress of it in my stories and things like that, but I will also in future years show what this bed is looking like. And in the spring, I will show the maintenance I do on it, which will be very minimal, but just to show you what I think it needs and what I will do. So as always, I hope you enjoy this. If you did, please share this video around. If you didn't enjoy it, share it anyway, because someone else may find something useful about it. These tips, these tricks, and learning from our fellow gardeners are what kind of we can glean little bits from and understand more about what's gonna work for us. Again, this is my Zone 5B garden in Iowa. Each of us is gonna have a different experience. But as always, thank you for watching. Check my website, wyseguy.com, for tips, for tricks, but most of all for recipes. All the vegetables I grow get used on my website, and all the recipes go on there. Until next time, I hope you can enjoy gardening, even if it's through a video, and just enjoy some aspect of getting outside.